This bull was stuck for days, until the old war veteran came to its rescue. The sound came first, a deep, ragged bellow that tore through the silent valley like thunder rolling across a battlefield. It echoed off the wet stone and through the broken limbs of trees that still dripped from the storm. Down at the base of Red Brush Ridge, a massive brown bull lay half submerged in thick, sucking mud. The creek bed, once dried and cracked, had become a trap after 3 days of unrelenting rain. Now it was a pit of cold sludge, and the bull was stuck in it, chest deep, trembling with exhaustion. His eyes rolled wildly. Each time he shifted his weight, the muck clutched him tighter, drawing him further in. He let out another groan, lower this time, hoarse and desperate. There was no one around, no fences, no cattlemen, no help. Just the wind hissing through soaked branches and the slow fading of the day. From the ridge above, a single man appeared, leaning slightly on a blackened wooden cane, his coat clinging to his frame, damp from the waist down. He moved with the stiff gait of someone who had long made peace with pain. His eyes, hidden beneath the shadow of an old brimmed cap, scanned the land with practiced focus. That was Conrad Rigg, a 67-year-old veteran who had once led men through minefields and sniper alleys, now living alone in a weather-worn cabin on the outskirts of the valley. He didn't come this way often, but something, a sound, a gut feeling, had drawn him off his usual path. His eyes locked on the bull. It wasn't just any bull. Massive and scarred, its hide streaked with wet clay and old battle marks. Even stuck in the mud, it looked dangerous. But it was helpless now, tired, legs trembling, flanks rising and falling like bellows on their last pull. Conrad stared at it for a long moment, unmoving. Then slowly he stepped forward. Each boot landed carefully on the soft ground, the cane tapping ahead of him like a probe. He made his way down the slope, never taking his eyes off the animal. The bull turned its head sharply at the sound. Its eyes widened. It bellowed again, a low, bone-deep warning. Instinct, fear, pride. But it couldn't move. Its legs were buried. Its strength was fading. Conrad stopped a safe distance away. He didn't try to calm it. He didn't talk. He just studied it, head tilted slightly, eyes narrowing. The ground sloped down and funneled runoff directly into the pit. That explained the soft underlayer. The bull must have wandered too far from the pasture, found the creek bed, and stepped right into a death trap. No fence, no warning, no chance. Brute force wouldn't work. If someone tried to pull the bull by its horns or neck, they'd break bone before they moved it. The mud wasn't just holding, it was anchoring. The suction alone was enough to rip muscle if not countered carefully. Conrad looked at the angle of the limbs, the depth of the trap, the shape of the land. Then he turned and began climbing the hill again, wordless and steady, his cane pressing into the wet earth. The bull let out another groan behind him, this time softer. It had stopped thrashing. Its breath came in shallow bursts. Its strength was almost gone. By the time Conrad returned to his cabin, the sky had turned a warm orange-gray. He moved inside with purpose. The place was small, but organized. Hooks of rope on the wall, a coil of tarp under the cot, a rusted toolbox beside an oil drum stove. From the corner, he pulled out 3 fence posts, smoothed on one side. Then, after some thought, he dug beneath his cot and brought out a tightly wrapped bundle, military green, oiled and sealed. Inside was a length of paracord, a harness rig, and an old carabiner system once used for rappelling. He handled them like old friends. Back outside, he lashed the fence posts together into a makeshift sled. The tarp would go over it. The rigging would serve as a pulley harness. It wasn't pretty, but it was smart. Field-grade smart. Built not for comfort, but for extraction. He reached the ridge again as the sun dipped lower, dragging the sled behind him on a makeshift wheel brace. Sweat mixed with rainwater on his face, but he didn't stop. Not when he heard the bull still breathing. As he spread the canvas tarp on the grass and began arranging the rope, an engine buzzed through the trees. An ATV approached along the trail. The man riding it slowed when he spotted the scene. The bull still trapped, the strange rig, the old man working silently beside it. "Hey!" the rider called out, pulling up the brakes. "That bull's not yours!" Conrad didn't look up. He tied a loop, adjusted a knot. "No," he said simply, "but he's dying all the same." The man got off the ATV. He was in his 50s, with gray stubble and a leather vest that hung heavy with rain. His name was Elias Brenner, a ranch hand from the north end of the valley. He'd been in Warstone for decades and had seen his share of bull rescues, but never one attempted by a limping loner with a homemade sled. "That's Bloodhorn," Elias said, nodding at the stuck animal. "Meanest bull in 3 counties. Most folks would say let him go." Conrad finished the knot and straightened slowly, wincing as his knee popped. He looked Elias dead in the eye. "Most folks aren't here." The words hung in the air. Elias stepped closer, eyeing the sled, the harness, the distance between the bull and dry land. "You got a plan for pulling him out?" Conrad pointed up the trail. "If I had a winch, or a truck with chain traction. Otherwise, just this." Elias hesitated. Helping meant risking more than just equipment. Grant Felder, the bull's owner, wasn't the forgiving type. He'd made more enemies than friends in the ranching world, and Elias had no interest in crossing him. But he also saw something else. The tight precision of the knots, the hard lines in Conrad's face, the sweat and mud soaked into his clothes. This wasn't recklessness, it was determination. Still, he tested the waters. "You're serious about this? That bull could kill a man if he gets free and panics." "He won't," Conrad said, looking back toward the pit. "Not if we get him out right." Elias looked at the sinking sun, then at the bull, then at the old man still gripping that cane like a soldier grips a rifle. "I'll think on it," he said. He turned back to his ATV, kicked the engine into gear, but Conrad didn't watch him leave. He simply knelt again by the tarp, hands moving over the lines, muttering numbers under his breath, angles, weight, distance. The bull let out another weak groan behind him, like a reminder that time was slipping fast. And somewhere in that moment, Elias made a decision. He drove off, but not away, toward town. The low rumble of an engine broke through the silence of dusk, bouncing off the walls of Red Brush Ridge like a distant growl. Conrad looked up from where he crouched beside the mud pit. His hands were covered in rope dust and grit, but his eyes stayed sharp, focused. The noise grew louder, and moments later, Elias returned, this time behind the wheel of an old tow truck that rattled with every bump in the trail. A rusted winch was mounted to the back, cable coiled tight like a coiled serpent ready to strike. The truck's headlights threw long shadows across the trees, and behind it came another ATV, carrying 2 younger men who looked barely old enough to grow a full beard. They parked near the clearing without a word. One of the boys stepped down, holding a thermos and a bag of gloves. The other, eyes wide with quiet respect, stood beside Elias. The mud pit lay still except for the occasional twitch from the bull. Bloodhorn's massive body sagged further now, his breaths slow and labored. His eyes blinked sluggishly, foam streaking from his mouth where exhaustion had dried the last of his fight. Conrad stood slowly, his joints aching from the hours of kneeling. Without waiting for introductions, he gestured toward the gear. "We don't have time to talk it over. I need hands. You two, start clearing that drainage channel on the left. If we don't relieve some of the suction, he's going to sink deeper when we move him." The boys exchanged glances but didn't question him. They moved quickly, pulling small spades and shovels from the truck bed and setting to work. Elias walked over to Conrad, nodding at the sled and tarp already positioned by the edge of the mud. "You really think this'll work?" he asked, folding his arms. "It has to," Conrad replied, adjusting the harness he'd laid out across the ground. "No one's coming with a helicopter. It's just us." The plan was precise, calculated like a battlefield operation. The tarp would need to be fed under the bull's belly, one end rolled as tight as possible, then slowly pushed through using long wooden poles. Once the tarp was beneath him, the rigged sled would support the weight, and the winch would do the pulling, slow, steady, and carefully guided. One wrong move could crush the bull's ribs or yank a leg from its socket. It wasn't just a matter of strength, it was about control. They got to work. Mud flew. The younger ranch hands dug without complaint, their faces streaked with sweat and specks of brown. Conrad moved between them, pointing, adjusting, reinforcing. His limp was more noticeable now, but he didn't stop. Just as the tarp was half beneath the bull, a violent screech of tires shattered the moment. Everyone froze. Gravel sprayed at the top of the ridge trail as a sleek black truck tore around the bend and skidded to a halt. The driver's door slammed open, and out stepped Grant Felder. He was a tall man with a belly hardened by stubbornness more than fat. His hat was yanked low, casting a shadow over his eyes, and his jaw was locked so tight it looked carved from stone. He stormed down the trail, boots snapping twigs beneath him. "What in heaven's name is going on here?" he barked. Elias tensed. The younger men stepped back instinctively. Conrad didn't flinch. He stood by the bull, one hand resting lightly on his cane. "That's my bull," Felder growled, eyes darting to Bloodhorn. "Who told you to touch him?" Elias stepped forward, raising both palms. "Grant, he was dying. You weren't around." "We didn't have time. You should have left him," Felder shouted. "He's cost me more trouble than he's worth. Mean as sin. Should have been gone last spring." The clearing went silent. The bull let out a low moan, as if punctuating the man's cruelty. The team stood frozen, unsure whether to back away or keep going. Then Conrad spoke, calm but firm. "Then walk away," he said. "But don't stop us." Felder's eyes narrowed like a wolf scenting defiance. He took a step closer, fists clenched. "You have no right." Conrad didn't move. "I'm not claiming your bull. I'm saving a life." The older man stared at him, mouth twitching as if deciding whether to turn it into a threat or a smirk. He chose neither. With a muttered curse, he turned on his heel, stomped back to his truck, and slammed the door so hard the windows shook. The engine roared to life. Tires spun, gravel flew, and in seconds he was gone, swallowed by the trees. Elias let out a slow breath. "He's not done," he muttered, rubbing his jaw. Conrad didn't respond. He just went back to work. Night fell completely, but none of the men left. They lit lanterns and strapped headlamps to their brows. The clearing became a halo of shifting light, their shadows long and bending. Bloodhorn barely stirred now. His eyes fluttered, his breathing shallow. Conrad reached into a side pouch he'd brought with the gear and pulled out a strange contraption, an improvised IV rig, cobbled together from tubing and a hydration bag. He knelt by the bull's massive neck, whispering as he slid the tube beneath the hide. No one asked where he'd learned to do that. They just kept digging and tying. The winch roared to life at midnight. Elias controlled the crank, his gloved hands steady. The cable groaned as it tightened. Conrad stood beside the bull, guiding every inch of movement, his voice calm and sharp. "Stop. Slack it. Too fast. Hold. Now again. Half a foot." Bloodhorn groaned as his body shifted. The mud made a horrible sucking sound. Everyone braced, waiting to see if the animal would panic, but the bull didn't thrash, didn't bellow. His head lolled slightly, but he stayed calm, as if knowing he was finally being helped. Inch by inch, they moved him onto the sled. The tarp slipped under with a wet slap. The harness tightened. The bull's full weight rested unevenly, but it held. Then the winch pulled again, a foot, another. A cracking branch somewhere in the distance made one of the younger men jump. Still, they didn't stop. Finally, with a low groan from deep in his gut, Bloodhorn shifted fully onto the sled. A cheer nearly broke out, but no one dared. The tension was still too thick. Conrad staggered backward, landing hard on one knee. His leg gave out beneath him. Elias caught him just in time. "You're out of your mind," Elias said, helping him sit against a nearby tree. Conrad wiped his brow with the back of his hand and let out a breath. "I've seen worse." The others smiled faintly, not sure what else to say. But the relief didn't last long. Headlights broke through the trees again, only these weren't Felder's. A white pickup truck rolled into view, followed by another. Both were marked with the county's emblem. Two uniformed men stepped out, boots crunching the gravel. "Who's in charge here?" the first one called out. Elias stepped forward. "We are. What's the problem?" "Got a report of stolen livestock and unauthorized use of private equipment," the second officer said, glancing at the winch, the sled, the bull. "This ain't theft," Elias snapped. "We saved his life." "Doesn't matter," the first officer replied. "That animal belongs to Grant Felder. Legally, it's his call." The clearing grew tense again. The younger men looked to Conrad, unsure what to do. The bull was still weak, vulnerable. If they took him now, all of this would have been for nothing. Then, without a word, Conrad pulled something from his coat pocket, a folded document, creased and slightly damp. He handed it to the lead officer. The man unfolded it and read in silence. His brow furrowed. "What's this?" Elias asked. "A land deed," Conrad said plainly. "Dated 2 weeks ago. The ridge and creek bed are mine. Bought it at auction. Grant never showed up to renew his claim." Elias blinked in disbelief. "You bought the land?" Conrad nodded, his voice calm. "Had a feeling it'd be needed." The officers exchanged glances. The air shifted. "Well," the lead officer said, handing the paper back, "if it's your land and the animal was found unattended here, we'll file a report, but we won't interfere." They turned and walked back to their trucks. As the taillights disappeared down the ridge, Elias chuckled, shaking his head. "You clever, quiet old fox." The next morning, long before the sun had fully climbed above the ridgeline, a series of quiet footsteps padded up the dirt path toward Conrad's cabin. The air still carried the chill of a storm recently past, but the sky was bright, and dew clung to the tall grass that framed the hillside. Down in a makeshift paddock, lined with fresh rope and scrapwood fencing, the bull stood, barely but proudly. Bandaged legs trembled beneath his enormous weight, and a threadbare horse blanket was draped across his back like a cloak. His sides lifted and fell in slow, controlled breaths, and he chewed from a shallow trough of hay with a kind of cautious dignity. His coat, once streaked with drying mud and blood, had been wiped clean in patches by the younger ranch hands who had stayed behind to help. Word had already spread. By noon, the name Bloodhorn was being spoken in every feed store and diner across Warstone Valley. Photos taken by Elias's phone had somehow made it to a local agriculture forum, and from there they were shared by a community blog affiliated with the regional radio station. The headline read, "Veteran pulls off impossible bull rescue after mudslide." And just like that, Conrad's quiet life up on Redbrush Ridge was no longer his alone. Elias returned before noon in a beat-up pickup filled with supplies. Feed, antiseptic, bandages, even a fold-out shade tarp for the bull's paddock. But he wasn't alone. Following his truck were 3 other vehicles carrying young ranch hands, some from neighboring counties, some from the local trade school, and one who claimed he'd driven all night after hearing about the rescue over breakfast radio. They didn't come to gawk, they came to help. "Got more hands than I expected," Elias said, stepping out with a small grin. Conrad stood by the gate, holding a weathered clipboard with his notes from the night before. He looked at the group approaching, each of them quiet, eyes wide but respectful. He gave a nod, small, but enough. One of the boys pointed at the bull. "That him?" "That's him," Elias said. "And believe me, last week he'd have ripped your head off just for looking at him." The bull raised his head at the voices. His eyes were alert now, no longer filled with panic, but with a slow-burning awareness. One of the boys took a cautious step forward before Conrad held up a hand. "Let him eat first," he said. "He needs strength, not attention." The others stopped, watching in silence as Bloodhorn, no, not Bloodhorn now, tore another mouthful of hay and stood just a little steadier than the hour before. As the group set about unloading supplies, Elias leaned against the paddock and eyed Conrad. "Tell me something," he said. "Why buy this land in the first place? You knew it'd turn into this?" Conrad didn't look at him right away. He folded a length of rope slowly, thumb running over the worn fiber. Then he spoke, voice quiet. "Didn't know," he said. "Just saw the signs. Mud always follows forgotten land." Elias blinked at the answer, then gave a slow, knowing nod. He didn't push further, but the mystery only grew. 3 days later, while Conrad was reinforcing one of the fence posts with a spade and a hammer, a black SUV rolled up the dirt path and stopped just short of the paddock. Out stepped a man in a pristine gray suit, slacks too clean for this part of the world, shoes untouched by gravel or dust. He carried a clipboard and a folded briefcase, and a silver badge clipped to his belt read, "Terravax Holdings." He approached calmly, but his eyes scanned the land with a practiced hunger. "Mr. Rigg?" he asked. Conrad nodded but didn't offer a handshake. The man took it in stride. "I'm Dean Harlow," he said smoothly, "with Terravax Holdings. We're managing the development initiative set for the Northern Ridge." "I've heard of it," Conrad said, still holding his hammer. "Well, we recently finalized acquisition of the Valley Edge from a Mr. Grant Felder. However, there seems to be a complication. Our survey team was delayed by an incident involving a bull? Conrad didn't respond. Dean cleared his throat, opening a manila folder. The land you purchased 2 weeks ago. It intersects a critical part of our construction corridor. Naturally, we'd like to resolve this as efficiently as possible. He pulled a folded check from his briefcase and held it out. We're offering 3 times what you paid. Generous, I think. Conrad didn't even reach for it. Not selling. Dean's confident expression didn't falter, but the corners of his mouth thinned slightly. Mr. Rigg, this is a significant project. Resort development, private housing, local jobs. We have investors expecting movement this quarter. You'll have to shift your quarter, Conrad said. Land's mine now. Dean's tone stiffened. Then I should inform you that if the area poses environmental hazards, or if livestock is being kept in unzoned territory, there may be legal... Conrad turned slowly, set down his hammer, and walked into his cabin. When he returned, he held a slim folder with 2 documents inside. One was a notarized copy of the land deed. The other was a multi-page environmental assessment stamped and sealed with the signature of the county's Preservation Committee. Dean took the papers, read the second one twice, and his face slowly drained of color. That report outlines a potential wildlife corridor running through the creek bed, Conrad said calmly. The field study was done 2 months ago. If left undeveloped, this land could qualify for habitat protection under the Wildlife Retention Clause. Dean folded the paper slowly, carefully. If that happens, Conrad continued, your resort gets frozen in court for at least 18 months, maybe more. Dean didn't reply. He just nodded, turned to leave, and muttered something too low to hear as he climbed into his SUV. The car rolled back down the hill, dust rising behind it in a silent retreat. Elias, who had witnessed the entire exchange from the paddock, gave a slow, impressed whistle. That bull might have saved more than himself, he murmured. Days passed. The ridge grew quieter again, but not lonely. Conrad and the ranch boys kept working. They reinforced the paddock, built a small lean-to for shelter, and planted fresh grass patches near the fence. The bull, who no one called Bloodhorn anymore, had earned a new name. One morning, as Conrad filled the water trough, he spoke it aloud for the first time. War Dog, he said, patting the bull's side. You're War Dog now. Elias burst out laughing when he heard it. War Dog for a bull? It fits, Conrad said with a shrug. Stubborn, loyal, doesn't know when to quit. The name stuck. Soon War Dog became something of a mascot. Ranchers who had once rolled their eyes at Felder's bull now brought their sons to see him. School kids made weekend trips up the hill just to take a photo beside the legendary Mud Bull. Someone even painted a wooden sign by the road. Welcome to War Dog Ridge. But through it all, Conrad remained quiet. He rarely accepted interviews. He didn't pose for photos. When Elias asked him why, sitting beside the paddock one evening, Conrad just looked out at the sunset. Didn't do it for them, he said. Did it because no one else would. Elias nodded but didn't speak, because in that silence he saw something deeper, something that ran far beyond fences and mud and broken cattlemen. He saw the old soldier who had fought wars, lost men, buried brothers in arms. And in that pit, 3 days ago, when the bull's eyes had screamed panic and confusion, Elias now understood what Conrad must have seen, not just an animal, but a memory, a flash of something long buried, someone Conrad couldn't save. The rescue was more than mud. It was memory. 3 months later, Red Brush Ridge looked nothing like the lonely patch of forgotten earth it had once been. The overgrown brambles that had once twisted over the ridge paths were now trimmed and managed with care, shaped into neat barriers that bordered newly laid walking trails. Wooden signs, simple, hand-painted, and staked into the ground, marked each path, each marked with words like Creek Watch, War Dog Fence, and North Slope Habitat. Alongside them were placards explaining the ecosystem, native birds, plants, soil preservation techniques, and, of course, the story of the bull that started it all. But what made the transformation truly remarkable wasn't what had been built, but what had been protected. A county-issued document now hung in the town hall's front window, printed in large font and bordered with the official seal, Red Brush Ridge Wildlife Reserve, community-zoned and environmentally protected. The land, once the target of developers and long ignored by its absentee owner, now stood shielded by both law and community. Conrad Rigg's quiet paperwork, combined with the viral attention War Dog's rescue had gained, had flipped the narrative. Terravax Holdings, after several failed attempts to contest the environmental designation, pulled out without ceremony. Their survey crews vanished overnight, and the company issued a one-sentence statement through local media: Red Brush Ridge Development Project withdrawn for reassessment. Grant Felder didn't get off so easily. Once the county confirmed that he had continued operating under the false claim that the ridge was still in his name, legal fines were levied for trespassing and unlawful intimidation of public officials during zoning filings. He didn't fight the charges. His name faded quickly, mentioned only in hushed tones at the bar. But Red Brush Ridge didn't mourn his absence. It had found something better to talk about. The cabin at the top of the ridge, once just a crooked shadow among the trees, had become something close to sacred. People came not to take selfies or ask questions, but to understand, to see the place where it happened. They walked slowly, respectfully. They brought things, not money, not gifts of admiration, but tools, lumber, pails of feed, fencing posts, and veterinary supplies. All donated, all set quietly near the paddock with handwritten notes that read, "For War Dog," or "For the next one." Conrad didn't speak much to visitors. Most didn't expect him to. He still woke up at dawn and walked the ridge trails with his cane, inspecting the fencing, checking the gates. The same tarp-roofed shelter that had once saved War Dog during recovery had now grown into a full corral, lined with hay bales and reinforced boards. A feed bin stood beside it, painted olive green, and War Dog, bigger, stronger, and less mean than his old name ever implied, spent most mornings there, chewing peacefully and flicking his tail against flies. War Dog had changed too. He no longer glared or paced the fencing. He no longer needed a rope halter or a safety gate. Sometimes, when Conrad sat beside him on the wooden stump he'd dragged over as a seat, the massive bull would press his head gently against the veteran's shoulder and just breathe. Deep, steady, calm. "He trusts you now," Elias said one afternoon as he helped stack new bales under the lean-to. Conrad just shrugged. "Doesn't mean he forgets." "Neither do you," Elias replied. They worked in silence after that, but the words lingered. One morning, a quiet knock came at the cabin door. Conrad opened it to find a small group of schoolboys with their teacher, all local, holding notebooks and water bottles. The smallest among them, no more than 10, with scuffed boots and a nervous smile, stepped forward and asked, "Mr. Rigg, is it okay if we visit War Dog?" Conrad nodded and waved them along the dirt trail. He watched from a distance as they approached the paddock in a tight little group, staying behind the wooden slats, whispering in awe. War Dog watched them too, his ears twitching, tail swaying. One of the boys held out a handful of carrots between the rails, and after a moment of stillness, War Dog took them gently from his palm. The boy turned back toward the cabin, eyes shining. "Is it true you used to be a hero?" he asked. Conrad, who had followed them down the trail with his slow limp, stopped beside the fence and looked down at the boy. His face was calm, eyes steady. "Not a hero," he said. "Just didn't leave when I could have." The boy thought about that for a moment, then turned and pointed at War Dog. "Well, he thinks you are." Conrad chuckled under his breath and stepped forward, laying a hand on the bull's wide forehead. War Dog snorted gently, and in one slow motion leaned forward, resting the weight of his massive skull against Conrad's shoulder. Not hard, not urgent, just firm enough to be felt. A gesture of loyalty, a gesture of trust. Behind them, the kids watched with quiet wonder, not speaking, just standing in the presence of something they didn't fully understand, but instinctively knew was important. Later that evening, Elias returned with another batch of supplies, this time accompanied by 3 young men from the local vocational school who had offered to help build a second shelter. As they unpacked plywood and fence wire, one of them asked, "Mr. Rigg, are you planning to turn this into a real animal rescue?" Conrad didn't answer immediately. He walked over to a half-finished post and tapped it with the butt of his cane, checking its strength. "Not planning anything," he said. "But if something comes up that needs saving, I won't turn away." Elias chuckled. "Same way you got into this in the first place." The young men laughed too, but not out of mockery. They understood the tone. They felt the weight in the silence. And that was how it was for the rest of that season. Word of the place continued to spread, not like gossip, but like folklore. People didn't exaggerate the story. They didn't need to. The facts were enough. The storm, the bull, the mud, the veteran. And the moment everything turned, not because someone was assigned to save, but because one man simply refused to leave. By late autumn, the leaves had begun to turn, casting gold and red across the ridge trails. War Dog's coat gleamed with new health. He walked stronger now, even ran short bursts across the pasture when the wind stirred the grass. Some days, Conrad would sit with him for hours. He never spoke about what it reminded him of, but Elias had seen it in his eyes. The same look from that night they hauled the bull out of the mud. That memory was still there, not just of an animal trapped, but of someone left behind. And so, the legend of Red Brush Ridge became more than a single rescue. It became a story passed from father to son, rancher to rancher, visitor to local. Not just about a stuck bull, not just about an old cabin or a fight against development. It became a story about how one quiet man, scarred by the past, found healing by pulling another creature free, not just from the mud, but from being forgotten. And from then on, the legend of Red Brush wasn't just about a stuck bull. It was about how one quiet man, scarred by the past, found healing by pulling another creature free, not just from the mud, but from being forgotten.